Hello, everyone. Good morning and good evening. Wherever you are joining us from, welcome back to the fourth night of the Tehran Summit, a platform for artistic resistance, radical thought, and collective imagination beyond the confines of borders and markets. My name is Afan Riasi, and I am the co-curator of this year's summit alongside Una Matisen Yerede. This edition is proudly co-organized by BO, the Association of Visual Artists Oslo, and the New Center for Research and Practice. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome Shuddhabrata Sengupta, artist, creator, and writer with the Raqs Media Collective. Based in New Delhi, Raqs has spent the last 3 decades weaving poetic entanglements of contemporary art, politics, and philosophy that resonate far beyond the disciplinary and geographic boundaries. Shuddha's work with Raqs has always refused to separate thinking from making, art from life, or poetics from politics. Instead, it proposes a mode of attention that is both deeply reflective and perpetually in motion, a restlessness that insists on staying with the trouble while imagining otherwise. Please join me in welcoming Shuddha as he presents his talk, Restless Contemplation.
Thank you. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Irfan and your friends in Oslo. It's a real pleasure to be with you. I've had so many productive and wild conversations with Irfan over the past few months because of the time that he spent at Coach in Delhi as part of the CISA curatorial intensive, but also before that on the alternative art school program and so on. So it's always a pleasure to be provoked by your exciting, scintillating mind. And I'm going to take that as an opportunity to take you all through some of our, shall we say, our restless contemplation of life and the universe. This restlessness, if I could share my screen now. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. Can you all see the first slide? I can't see any of you, but
Not yet.
not yet.
Not yet.
My name is. It seemed to be all right just now, so I'm trying to figure out what happened. Is it visible now? It should say Restless Contemplation, Raqs Media Collective.
For some reason, I cannot see it.
Anybody else?
Strange.
My name is Shuddhabrata. I, along with Monica Narula, Shuddhabrata Sengupta, under Raqs Media.
You should be able to see something.
Maybe try to reshare your screen.
Sorry?
Maybe try to reshare your screen because now we just see your picture.
You see just my picture.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to share. Now?
Yes.
Now you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Perfect. Yeah, everyone can see something? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to take you through what I understand as being this idea of a reckless, restless contemplation. Trying to say okay to the transcription message. Wait. Yeah. So let's begin by talking about what is Raqs.
A Sumatran nomad, a splendid prison club, and a gold down the Luna are loudly arguing on the way to extinction. Which form of life will persist there, outlasting all others? How many will persist in the place in the test of the geological? The Homo sapiens out of turn says that only people gain the future. And this is splendid drop with no poison to dispense with contribution. The golden needle barely into existence chooses silence. Only the formerly magnificent manuscripts, legendary publication, speaks on. Nothing persists, but it is not real. We are like it. We are still being overwhelmed with history and in the life. So we will, after the mission, in our memory. But once you are done with us, what will be left to you to look for and live on? Once you talk, who will remember you? The properties, they do not matter.
So that was just by way of an introduction to my two colleagues, Jibesh Bakshi and Monica Narula. From what you heard, you can sense that we have an interest in the processes that describe life. I was very curious about the overall description of this festival of conversations. What is it? Nomads looking for the black hole?
And
What
the
was it?
rest were those nomads who found the black holes.
And the rest were those nomads who found the black holes. So that's a peculiar kind of tagline for a conversation or a series of conversations, but perhaps not so peculiar, because if we are talking about life processes, then we could also talk about life processes at the most expanded scale. We've just been writing an essay for eFlux that will come out right now, which talks about how we understand the dance between theory and practice. And we're increasingly drawn to the idea that we have to take a stand in relation to uncertainty. This is 2025 is the 100th year, the centenary of the uncertainty principle. Not to be paralyzed by uncertainty, to be energized by it, and to make decisions, because artistic practice is always about making decisions. And you could say that uncertainty paralyzes us from making decisions, but like the nomads wandering around the black hole, at the event horizon, looking in and perhaps drawn into the black hole, we might find that not as a moment of life-stripping paralysis, but perhaps an exit into another universe. Because I keep my eyes open about what's happening in the world of cosmology, I was delighted to discover that there are two scientists, two Iranian researchers, Niayesh Afshordi and Razieh Pour Hassan, who are at a university in Canada, at the Perimeter Institute of Astrophysics, great name. And they propose a completely new theory for the origin of the universe. They say that the Big Bang, what is called the Big Bang, and this is a question that has always troubled me, what was before the Big Bang? So they're trying to answer that question. Could be the three-dimensional mirage of a collapsing star and a universe profoundly different from our own. I think this would speak well, Irfan, to your portholes, to the logic of the portholes, where we might think of the universe itself at its very inception as a porthole to the collapse of another universe. So it's like something that collapses and then streams out, and that streaming out is why we are here. Now, this might seem strange. Why are we talking about all this? But I think that the Raqs Media Collective's practice has, over time, decided to pay attention to the dynamics of the processes of life, creation, and destruction. You could say Raqs, which is a word that perhaps many of you would know. In our part of the world, it's often described as a whirling, as a rotation. and that rotation produces a state of ecstasy amongst dervishes, and they go into this kind of trip or trance, and that is a contemplative practice that is also dynamic. This is actually a pretty old idea. So here's a little fragment of a poem from Jalaluddin Rumi, a man who traveled between Balkh in Afghanistan to Konya in Anatolia, and is a part of the entire Persianate universe. All of us who live between, let's say, Dhaka and Anatolia share this universe. And his poem here, which begins, I will read just the first line. Har zarre agar khosh ast, agar mahzun ast, I guess. And it basically goes on to say, the rest of the poem goes on to say, arise, O day, the atoms are dancing. The spheres in the wind are dancing. Souls ecstatic with joy are dancing. And the word for dance in each of these lines is Raqs, with which we name ourselves, that kinesis, that energy. I'll whisper in your ear where they're dancing. Each atom in the wind or desert is good-natured like this. We're enchanted. Each atom, whether happy or sad, is bewildered by the sun, happy without reason. So this idea of the dancing particles, the dancing atoms that constitute the force and the energy and the life and the love of the universe, which is what we're all in, which is what we contemplate, is central to the notion of why we call ourselves Raqs. In my little nerdy journey into the relationships between modernity in, let's say, Iran and India, one figure that I think about a lot is the novelist and writer Sadegh Hidayat, who wrote this incredible novel called The Blind Owl, Bofaqur. And it inaugurates a kind of modernism. It inaugurates a spirit of contemporaneity in Iranian culture, and incidentally was written over a long, hot year in Bombay, in India, where Hidayat was in a kind of exile, kind of hiding, kind of refuge, and he decided to write this completely surreal novel. Sadegh Hidayat is also a kind of scholar of Persian poetry, and he makes a claim that he studied the entire corpus of the poems of Hafiz. In India, too, we do the Fale Hafiz. You take a book of Hafiz, you turn a page, and you read your fortune. And Hidayat says that all of Hafiz can be boiled down to just one idea, that of the rotating particles. The same idea of the Raqs Zarra, the dance of the atoms, right? So it's a long historical idea, which obviously has fascinated different generations, of this rotation, this revolution, and this ecstatic, kinetic contemplation. Not the contemplation that asks you to shut down and get into some silent meditative trance, but a contemplation that is active. What would that look like? In our understanding, it's something that makes the world hover around you and rotate around you. This is a small extract from a film of ours called The Bicyclist Who Fell into the Time Cone, which takes the year 1980 as an example of time when almost nothing happens. So it's one of our meditations on time where we try to understand the difference or the tension between stillness and change, silence and noise, and movement and stasis. In the year 1980, almost nothing happened except that a would-be dictator in India fell from the sky, and I was a teenager on a bicycle watching this plane fall. So throughout this film, there is this young person on a bicycle who considers the universe changing around them. Just a fragment of an idea to share with you this idea of this notion of of being at the center of a revolving, rotating revolution of life and time and the world. So, where do we go from there? We go from there to the idea that there is a certain kind of extraordinariness, a miraculousness to this everyday idea, this everyday notion of change, of transformation, and revolution. So I'm going to play you a small segment of a video about an exhibition of ours at the Kunsthalle Nordrhein-Westphalia K21 in Düsseldorf. And it's a kind of survey show, but the film will give you an idea of the kind of registers of work that we work with. Audio visible? Audio is there?
Yes.
When we made Raqs, which was 25 years ago as film students, we used the word media without thinking about it. We just said Raqs Media Collective. We basically use anything and everything we can get our hands on in order to articulate, to emphasize, to things, ideas, propositions that we think shake things up or affect things or change the outline of things.
Our curiosities are the engine of our practice. So artworks grow out of all the questions that we have of each other and of the world. Raqs, the name, which can also be a description of a state of ecstasy for a whirling dervish, can also be read as rarely asked questions.
2008, 9, 10, we worked on a very long project called Capital of Accumulation, which was looking at the legacy of Rosa Luxemburg. We went to this factory called the Rosa Luxemburg factory, which was a light bulb factory. That's why this work has this multiple layer of a text that is the revoltage. So then it becomes voltage and revolt. And then that collective spark that it comes, then goes. So you have to learn in your ideas to hold on to the spark. So this work is about holding on and understanding.
I think the question of time, as you know, is the question that we all live with. It is a human construct. It is a dimension that we have made for ourselves to give our own existence a certain kind of directionality. What is it that we find valuable in the constructs that we make for ourselves? And why do we keep them and hold on to them with the intensity that we do?
So this form started moving because we inhabit in a city like Delhi. We inhabit in a city like Bombay or Sao Paulo or Lagos. And that, I think, allowed us to be confident of this form. So we didn't kind of stay within the art historical logic of art production or just plain cinema history, which I think allows us a certain freedom and a certain kind of flexibility to keep alert to the present situation, which is very fast changing always.
So that gives you a very abbreviated sort of concentration of ideas and forces. Time, the electricity of revolt, play with language, and a certain attention to the details of historical records and archives that produce not facts, but a kind of imagination that allows us to think about facts differently. So let's take time itself. What if we could fold time in the same way as we can fold a piece of paper? Supposing we could fold it into a boat or an airplane, what kind of voyage would we find ourselves embarking? Now, our concern with time basically stems from thoughts about the working day and the working night, or the night of exhaustion after the day of labor. From the very beginning, when we started thinking about clocks, and we make quite a few different kinds of clocks, we thought about time as something that can be read as a sensation, as emotion, as as feelings. And this clock constitutes an array of about 27 clocks, 24 clocks for different time zones, and 3 clocks for, like in football, extra time. And these time zones are located very precisely in different cities. So you can have Delhi, you can have Tehran, you can have Oslo, you can have Berlin, you can have Lagos, New York, Shanghai, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in Fiji. And the 3 extra time cities are cities found from literature, myth, and folklore. They could be the city of Iram, which is a paradise. They could be Babel, from which the languages disperse in the biblical myth. They could be Shangri-La. They could be Vaikunt. There could be all kinds of different cities, and each time we show this work, there's 3 different configurations of mythic or fictional cities. And there the clocks run counterclockwise. So you always have this tension between a clockwise chronology and a counterclockwise chronology, in which it's possible to share a set of feelings. So you could be guilt, past, remorse in Delhi, and perhaps in, I don't know, Almaty, which is more or less in the same longitude as Delhi, whereas you could be indifference, past, ecstasy somewhere else. So the longitude and latitude grid allows you to both share a set of emotions, but never necessarily at the same time. So perhaps it's a statement about the transversal, about the nature of experience and sensation in the world today, where we feel that we share different things. Just before we started, Irfan asked me, so how's the war? There's a bit of a time lag. There was going to be a stupid and unnecessary war between the stupid regimes that rule 2 countries, India and Pakistan. Fortunately, this war has now been held in abeyance in a kind of fictional ceasefire. But the fact that Irfan asked me, how's the war, is a kind of expression of political jet lag. We've now gone beyond the war. We're dealing with the consequences of this fictional war in our domestic national space, whereas the world maybe still thinks the war is going on. Luckily, it isn't. But this is an indication of the fact that although we are often united by a sense of chronology in the news, we all know what is happening in Gaza, we all know what is happening in different parts of the world, but our different vantage points bring differential urgency. Sometimes we are lethargic, sometimes we dream the world in dreams, and sometimes we are alert in a way. And these different sensations of time also depend on the kind of exhaustion that you feel in the laboring day. These clocks were initially inspired by the kind of clocks that you see in hotels and airports and all sorts of spaces where there's an indication that people might be coming from different times. They were also present in the outsourced workspaces of back office workers in India who might be awake in the night in Delhi or Bangalore while people are getting up to go to work in Seattle or Chicago and are asking questions that are being answered by people in Indian outsourcing companies. This was a reality of the early 2000s, still exists. So it's a kind of way in which the internet divides and multiplies the working day. So there's a consideration on time. Time automatically leads us to the idea of measure, which is another thing that we are restlessly interested in, constant drive to measure. And here, for instance, is a work of ours that has aged well, I think. The Untold Intimacy of Digits, or UID, which takes this handprint and renders it into a larger than life, larger than human body size screen, where each time it's being shown, like right now, it counts towards infinity. This handprint is a kind of descendant of a handprint of a man called Raj Konai, a peasant contractor in Bengal whose handprint was taken in 1858, because nobody in the colonial government ever trusted anything that anyone said. So they had to take handprints as kind of evidence of this is the person who said that he is taking this much money for this much work. And then the handprint found its way to the laboratory of a man called Francis Galton in London, who was obsessed with measurements. And there it became the foundation for a research into the idea of fingerprinting, which is the measure of individual identity taken from a trace on paper and ink. And that's why we can say that this handprint, which counts to infinity, is the ancestor of biometric processes that we're all familiar with today. In India, there's a program called the UID, the Unique Identification Database, which seeks to reduce every resident on Indian territory into a biometric measurement. And that is now the basis for many different kinds of very vicious taxonomic politics. Who can be a citizen, who can't be, who has rights to resources, who doesn't have rights to resources. And the UID measurement is something that we are constantly producing. So it's a strange way in which a colonial instrument or a colonial technology becomes the mainstay of the administrative interference of the Republican state into the most intimate areas of its subjects' lives. I won't even say citizens, subjects' lives. So measurement, time, measurement. And this leads to this question of what we talked about earlier, rarely asked questions. If you take time and measurement as your kind of axis, you can use them to constantly ask questions about everything that you do. I'm going to show you a short clip about an exhibition that we curated, the Shanghai Biennale in 2014-15. And one of your audience, Lantians, was a part of this Biennale. I recognize his name, so he knows what we're going to talk about. And this is a kind of brief little essay film about why not ask again. So let's see that.
Are you familiar with the three-body problem? It troubled Isaac Newton back in the 1600s as he watched the moon moving through the night sky. Newton's law of gravity can exactly determine the orbit of one body around another, the moon and the earth, say. However, where a third is involved, the sun, the orbit becomes unpredictable, non-repeating, unsolvable. The three-body problem is also the title of a trilogy of best-selling sci-fi novels by Liu Cixin about Trisolaris. Trisolaris is a planet in a system with three suns, whose unpredictable orbit means that it's alternately ravaged by periods of intense heat and extreme cold. With the existence of their home planet under perpetual threat, the Trisolarans look for habitable planets to colonize. On Earth, they make contact with a Chinese physicist whose faith in humanity is so shaken, she believes that only an outside force may be able to save us. The three-body problem is a useful concept for navigating Why Not Ask Again, the 11th Shanghai Biennale, which runs between November 2016 and March 2017 at Shanghai Power Station of Art. Curated by the New Delhi-based Raqs Media Collective, Jibesh Bagchi, Monica Narula, and Shuddhabrata Sengupta, the show includes work by 92 artists and artist groups from more than 40 countries. The majority of these hail from what might be called, with qualification, the Global South. The show, though, while haunted by the spectres of colonialism, seems less interested in East-West binaries than in the messy complexities of our fundamental interconnectedness at the level of the micro and macro, personal and political, as lovers, family members, citizens, consumers, and animals that are part of an ecosystem that sustains us all and for which we're collectively responsible. It offers some dystopian, as well as some more hopeful propositions for our interactions with one another and with the natural world. Aptly, given that the word Raqs refers to the entranced state of whirling dervishes, dance is a thread that draws us through this exhibition. On the ground floor, Hao Xingban's film Off Takes uses the ballroom as a metaphor for the interaction between individual and collective against the backdrop of changes to Chinese society. Shukti Topo Agopo, the last movie by Bengali filmmaker Ritik Gotto, and another curatorial touchstone, features a sequence of West Bengali Chahor dance. Screened here as part of a work by Boynak Biswas, the dance symbolizes a search for origins in the troubled first decades after Indian partition. In Leeming Way's Our Labyrinth, a performer scatters a small mound of rice grains with slow, ritualistic gestures. While the Biennale programs 51 Personae and Theory Opera, which will unfold across the course of the exhibition, follow a choreographic logic of action and interaction. Less literally, the question lurking behind many of the works in this show is who must dance to whose tune. A new commission by the Danish collective Superflex invites us to lie beneath a planetarium-like screen. We listen to a story that interweaves Chinese zodiac legend with the historic journey of Chinese pigs to Danish farms and the crisscrossing in time and space of Danish telegram wires and Chinese internet cables. How many national symbols, like Danish bacon, are founded on essential foreignness? The looped film revolves, like constellations through the night sky. The pendulum of geopolitical influence swings from east to west and back. Circles and cycles are everywhere, from Aki Sasimoto's witty laundrette washer dryers to the real-time 365-day solar calendar over which John Gerard's shimmering, digitally simulated oil slick unfolds. If this exhibition is about anything, it's perhaps the failure of linear progress, the failure of globalized capitalism to deliver on its promise to continue to make things better for us all. 3 days before the Biennale opened, when Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, we witnessed one catastrophic effect of the collapse of this narrative in a country where it has served as a kind of foundation. Barack Obama's reassuring last words in his election night speech, "No matter what happens, the sun will rise in the morning," form an uncanny counterpoint to the sunset that closes the first book in the third body problem trilogy, where humanity's fate seems sealed. Will what rises in the morning be the same sun? Will we get the chance to do things differently? Raqs urges us to ask questions again, because the answers might change. They know that no two turns of the wheel are ever the same.
No two turns of the wheel are ever the same, which means that there is a constant need within us to consider the last turn of the wheel, history, and its monumentality, how the past weighs onto the present. And this again is a question of how do we think about time? So I'm now going to take you to a monumental work, or a work not monumental in significance or size, but a work that is monumental because it is about monuments. And this is something that we call Coronation Park. Let's look at another little film about it. This is what it looks like. This is in the Avenue of the Giardini in the Venice Biennale in 2015.
We are Raqs Media Collective. Monica, they've been working in Delhi and we've been working together. And what we are presenting in the Giardini in all the world's futures is a project of Coronation Park, the assemblage of sculptural material, foundations for them, and inscriptions. They form a story.
Some of the things that we keep coming back to is the question of what time means, how is it experienced? We don't see an arrow, a direct arrow of progress or development or linearity between past, present, and future. But the question of the relationships between moments of time, which could be across place, across geographies, across histories. How does time disintegrate? What does one take out and put back?
So concretely, for instance, here with the coronation part, what we are thinking about is that no matter how strong a force of power seems, in time, inevitably it declines. So we are talking about the inevitability of abdication.
And the fear of the inevitability of abdication, because
Of the power.
decline is not like, oh, over time. Decline can also happen as an interruption, as a rupture, as a disruption, and that is also something that interests us deeply.
Jordan wrote a very fascinating story as part of the British colonial administration called Shooting the Elephant. And in that story, he actually, I think one of the first meditation on seeing the hubris of a very powerful colonial power, the imperial power, which looking from inside, you could understand its demise, its hollowness, its demise, its futility, its internal growth. It's a kind of an examination or a meditation on the inner life of power, its own doubt, its own sense of its own futility, and its own sense of coming to terms of it actually not being able to even act in the world because of its own demise, its own weight taking it down. So that is what interests us today, because I think today in the world, one has to re-examine the way power kind of works itself out, plays itself out, talks.
Something is missing in each of this house. And these can mean two ways, for instance, in terms of thinking about time. That something not yet built or something that is also already destroyed. And it's that flux, that in-between, suggesting that
Has been
that
not yet.
power's self-image may be always very deep. But whenever we ask questions, we see that it has always both been eroded and also simultaneously. So that tension is what we are hoping to think about.
So, Coronation Park is basically a reminder that no matter how eternal power seems in all our cities, whether it's Delhi or Tehran or Jerusalem or Gaza or wherever, New York or Chicago, that permanence or that perception of permanence is always an illusion. That empires tend to pretend to their eternity precisely at the moment when they're their most weak and most vulnerable. I think we are living in a world right now where there are many people who have become almost frozen into statues of themselves, like these gigantic sculptures. Little men turned into gigantic sculptures in their own imagination. And that's precisely the moment when power is not at its strongest, but at its weakest. I think we see these weak men, they tend to be men, ruling over us all over the world right now. And instead of despairing at the seeming eternity of their power, we might as well take some relief from the fact that all these statues are about to fall. I think that's what Coronation Park gives us. So then, from monuments to memorials, to how do we remember? If power's eternity is a kind of amnesiac proposition, of forgetfulness about the fact that power will fall, there's also the need for us to remember everything, all the violences that have shaken our world, that have made us who we are, with all our scars. Since this exercise has two poles, one in Tehran and the other in Oslo, I thought that while we began, in a sense, from Tehran, we might as well end in a not yet Oslo. What I'm going to show you is a small film about a proposition for a memorial that we were involved in over the last 1.5 years. We were the finalists for the memorial to the terrorist atrocity that happened in Oslo on the 22nd of July, when an extreme right-wing terrorist gunned down several 69 teenagers and planted a bomb which resulted in 8 more deaths. So 77 people were killed. And we were invited for a very moving and difficult process of thinking about this, what could be a memorial for this. And so without further ado, let me just show you a little film about how we were thinking about this memorial.
You see, we have a very profound memory of the July 22nd, 2011 incident. It struck us very hard. And we said, this is something we should think about and remember because it's part of our memory as well.
When you've grown up with the fear of terror in your entire adult life, so you can empathize with people far away who might not have, who have to deal with this in their lives in a different way.
One of the things that we want to contribute to the debate in Norway and in the world is what does the new heterogeneity that is life today, the last 200, 300 years, the way the world has shaped, needs a consideration of how to live in the many in a very, very considered way. And our work in this memorial is to bring that consideration, to know how to grieve with each other and how to always have a tranquility in relationship to the many.
What do we do in Raqs? We make art. We make art across different forms, genres, practices.
We see ourselves as a kind of a studio that is continuously thinking about what is the shape of the contemporary, what is the way we think and work, and how do we live the present. And
it's a way of making in the world where you are not driven only by what concerns you, but the fact that collective actions which have to deal with both consensus and dissensus, agreement and disagreement, can work towards making things of beauty and meaning in the world.
Well, the proposal respects the idea of the plaza. It doesn't seek to dominate it. It wants it to be a place where people can move. And it starts with one image that we saw in the present holdings of the 22nd July Memorial Center, which is a broken clock. This is the broken clock which used to be on Mulagata 19 that was shattered at the impact of the first explosion.
And then we started playing, and then when we took out the broken part, it looked like a bird in flight. So the broken part for us became a life that can never return, a time that it's gone. It's a broken, it's cut.
To me, it feels a little bit like a flock of birds that are both sort of settling down and taking off. Some are descending, some are ascending. And what I like about that idea is that you're never sure whether it is becoming or unbecoming.
The structure that we were thinking with a lot and which was present in our minds is a beautiful architectural site in Delhi called the Jantar Mantar, which literally means the machine and the code. It's an 18th century astronomical observatory. These rising climbing forms were for us interesting ways to think about the wingspan rising as the birds took flight. So there is a conversation in the design of what we are hoping to build between the architecture of Delhi and a space in Oslo.
So you have to think of the space which does commemorate, it does commemoration. It is a memorial, it remembers people. It is a place where you can sit and meet people. It is a place where you can go on completely on your own. The idea is that the rest, the living, has to not just forget, but do things with each other. Call each other, see each other, seek each other. That's the space. That's the way the other birds are working.
this is a memorial that should encourage people to break their silences. It should not stun us into a paralyzed silence of grief, but which should actually.
Sorry. I'm sorry, there was some problem with my computer power, which I had to fix. Anyway, I think I will try and get back to this again. I'm sorry about. We might have to shift to a different machine. Something seems to have gone wrong with this, with my screen sharing and the power. But maybe this is a good time to actually stop and take questions, ideas, and so on. And I hope that the power will stay on.
Thank you so much, Shraddha. Very amazing presentation. I don't say this for many like artists, but there is this term in Islamic philosophy which is called aql fa'al, which is translated in active intellect, which means like a source where brings something strange out of you. Like, for example, a relation between a sword and a furnace. When you put a sword in a furnace, it becomes red. It turns red. It becomes like very hot. These are the qualifications within the sword that are not usually affiliated with sword, like being hot or red. But when they're in relation to these furnace as the aql fa'al, they start something new comes out of this object. And I would say Shuddha has always been the relation between me and Shuddha has always been this the relation of a sort of a sword and the furnace, you know. It's just the aql fa'al and an object that is just waiting for something new to like sort of comes out, you know. It's very engaging and also inspiring and surprising even to me. Yeah, very much darkening, you know, instead of like enlightening. Yeah, absolutely. Just if anybody has any questions, by the way, they can write it in the chat or raise hand. For me, it's very interesting that you're talking about the issue of change, like the subject matter of change as a collective. And when we were talking about the idea of like me and Una, when we were talking about the theme of this year's summit, one of the themes were territorialization and deterritorialization and reterritorialization, which are these concepts that Deleuze and Guattari talks about. And one of their main issues with this issue, like territorialization or reterritorialization, is fascism. And coming from a context that the word revolution is not really a positive term anymore, you know, it has so like negative connotations to it. There are people right now in Iran living in the aftermath of the 1979 revolution, unfortunately. And I want to ask you if you can talk about change and collective thinking and how it can sort of leads us towards a well thought desire, you know, something that I don't know, doesn't lead towards nor fascism and neither fascism and nor terrorism, you know?
Thank you. I think this is a question that is quite alive in a lot of minds across the world. I mean, there's nothing that says fascists are not revolutionaries. They are. They're revolutionaries on the right. And and I don't think that the term that used to be used for them, which is that they're counter-revolutionaries, is correct. They propose their own revolutions, right? And they propose their own radical transformations of society. It's not that they're fascists are never conservatives. So when the 79 revolution in Iran began eating up its own children, that was not a conservative move. That was a radical move. Now, I know that people are tired of revolutions, but revolutions are not tired of people. Revolutions don't necessarily happen when we want them to happen. They happen when everything else fails, right? So if you look at what was pre-revolutionary Iran, the Shah's party was called, if I remember correctly, Rastakhiz, which
Right.
is resurrection, restoration,
Exactly.
right? That was also a kind of, and he saw himself as a revolutionary. So the Shah always produced the rhetoric of the white revolution, right? So there are these two cycles of revolutions that have produced a disaster for the Iranian people and for the rest of the Middle East and for many of our societies. But I think that cycle is now changing as we have an interest in cycles and rotations. We do think that whatever might be the nature of the state in Iran, the people have moved on. And I think that's the case in many parts of the world, that regimes that come to power claiming legitimacy and the monopoly over the people's affections, whether it is Trump or Modi, actually don't get more than about 35, 36% of the electorate. That's not even the population. So a large majority of the population actually refuses the regimes and carries on. So one of the most revolutionary virtues, as far as I'm concerned, is patience. And as artists, we must continue to interrogate the questions that are both a part of everyday life, like the price of bread, but also the questions that are the questions of the dancing atoms, which constitute the universe. Because that time scale gives us a certain freedom to think things differently from the urgencies that constantly visit us right now. So if one has a ambidextrous attitude where you have one hand in the current moment and its currency, and another hand perhaps at the beginnings and the ends of the universe, then you're located in a way that makes it possible for you to think about time, rotation, revolution differently. Then you can sometimes be the furnace and sometimes be the sword.
Sometimes be the person that summons the teleporter gates,
Yes.
which I think that's the role of artists, like creating different relations in the
Because I think that you're right in the sense that the teleporter gates always also remind us that another universe is just around the corner. It's not some distant object in space. Another time is always lurking right now. And it will surprise us before we surprise the world.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. It was really interesting to follow. I have a question regarding, I guess, changes in temporality, in the sense that, I mean, change is often perceived as something that's linear or constructive, but I guess change can also be dysfunctional and disruptive. And I was just wondering if you maybe could elaborate a bit on like how you perceive change and how you talk about that word, also in reality, like in relationship to temporalities.
Yeah, I mean, there's a dance between chance and design. We may design change, but change may chance upon us differently. So I think we're always always located in a kind of torque, if you like, between the accidental and the desirable. So change is often disruptive, and I don't think we should be scared of disruption or being disrupted. Sometimes the most productive things happen because what we take for granted is completely turned upside down. And it may be the role of artists to produce visions that are disruptive insofar as they produce the possibilities of completely different orders of thought. And that, in a situation where we are always being asked to fall in line, purchase something. I mean, now advertising enters our consciousness even in the most intimate ways. So the role of advertising might not be is to confirm the existing structure of what can be purchased and what can be desired. The role of art would be then to be the complete opposite, is to perhaps turn you off from this logic of accumulating desires. And that's a disruption that the world may need. I mean, advertising produces images, often very compelling images, very sophisticated images. The intention is different. The intention is for you to just go and acquire something that is telling you it's acquirable. Art's intention can be very different. Art's intention can be to ask you, why are you so keen to acquire anything in the first place? Why can't you just relax? That's a disruptive intention. That's why artists are, what we always say, provocateurs. There's philosophical agents provocateurs of the moment. They're not there to conform our expectations of what reality should be.
Thank you.
I don't
Shima?
know if
Hi, thank you so much. It was a really nice talk. I actually joined late and I'm a bit sad that I lost the first part, but you mentioned that patience sometimes could be the most revolutionary feature. I would like to be like, can you more elaborate on that? Because you also mentioned about the disruption in an artist's life, and I would like to know your sometimes silence is also could be like revolutionary. How did affect on your art and on your projects? Since I would see all of them as very revolutionary or works or projects.
well,
Thank you.
I mean, we have the same word for patience as you do, which is sabr, right? And the sabir,
That's the word, sabr.
sabr, and both sabr and the other word which I like very much is intizar, waiting, which is also a kind of patience, right? So
Yes.
to wait, to attend to time as it passes, and to be in the flux of that time, and to know that things will change. I think the difference between patient and impatient people is that patient people actually know that things will change. They just wait for the change to happen. Impatient people think that things will not change. So then they are in a rush to try and make things change, and often that deepens the things that don't change, right? So patience is for me a revolutionary virtue because it is actually confident that things will be different tomorrow from what they are today. Your generation in Iran has shown patience. They have shown exemplary patience by saying, okay, you're not allowing us to do this or that or the other. We will wait until you guys get exhausted and old and die. And then we will take over. That's it's a beautiful thing for all of the rest of us to learn from. I'm learning every day from how young people behave in Tehran. And I'm telling people in India that this is how we must learn in the face of oppression, to be patient, to know and to have confidence in ourselves that things will change. And that makes things change.
Have you seen any of I would like to see if you have any examples from the other artists who actually have this as a reflection in their work. We have that in our society, and like as an observer, we've been kind of enjoying how it's going on and how patient our generation was and is. But I would like to see it in the art world. How do you see any reflection from that patience in the artist world?
I think that all artistic processes that attend to time are about, they teach us patience. And there are many different in different parts of the world. I mean, we certainly work a lot with time, but anything that attends to tiredness, exhaustion, work, labor, dreams, waiting for things to change, desire, all of that pertains to change. I saw this remarkable Iranian film recently, which is about, it's called The Seed of the Sacred Pomegranate in English.
Yes.
Dana something.
Anar.
Dana
Anar.
دانه انجیر مقدس.
Anjir
Anjir
Muqaddas.
Muqaddas.
Oh, okay.
Right. Yeah.
Is that by Rasulov, right?
Yes,
Rasulov, yeah.
exactly. Now, it's a film, most of which happens in a very small apartment. And there are these two young women, their mother and the father. That's all there is. It's this claustrophobic apartment in which everyone is waiting for something to happen. There's a mystery, there's a missing gun, and they have to, and it is in microcosm, everything that we read about Iran, and not just about Iran, the conflict between an old order that is refusing to die and young people who are waiting for things to change inside the four walls of a house, right? I think it was a remarkable work that taught us to think differently about time. Because you have to wait for the structures to fall on their own as well. Sometimes you give a little.
I think we lost them.
I think so.
That's sad.
Yeah.
Should we just give it like a few minutes and see if he comes back?
Let me ask him.
Enough patience is quite revolutionary, have we learned.
Yeah. Oh, he's back.
Sorry, this is what I was afraid of. The power went and the generator didn't turn on. So,
Well, we were patient, so
but we were
we're here.
patient. I was patient. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So I had a standby, the product of patience. When one thing fails, you have to always switch to the other one. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't. I don't know if I answered Shima's question.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, there was a question actually in the chat box, which I'm really into that, and I would like to have your opinion on that too.
What's the question in the chat box?
Can we
you
have
read it for me?
can we have share a bit of question, and then we can go to Maziar's.
Okay, thank you, organizers of Tehran Summit, and thank you, Shuddha,
Hi.
for
Hi,
presentation.
Piotr.
Yes, hi. Shuddha, I was thinking, since you, as a person, not as an artist, not as an artistic entity or being a part of an artistic collective, has been always pretty sharp on the political events which are happening in India or internationally wide, very direct and telling names, accusing, or opening up the discussions. I'm wondering if you ever felt tempted also to drag it into your artistic practice, being, less abstract, being more direct to the bone, exploiting the institutional systems of power which exist in Western contemporary art world. Or maybe it has happened sometimes, and I was blind, and we were blind, not able to capture it. How does it work in your case in relating to this? The levels, of course, we can also express the levels of political questions in many other ways, but I'm asking about this activist tactics when things through the artistic practice are also going very sharply and directly.
Thank you. It's a very deep question and sharp question. Let me try and answer it this way. I see our artistic practice as something like a philosophical laboratory or a mathematical playground for ethical and political questions. The reason why I can be as sharp as you say I am in my other life is because my ideas are sharpened in the philosophical laboratory of my artistic practice. Jacques Rancière says something very interesting as to why the aesthetic is the political. He says that it's to do with the distribution of the sensible. How do you feel about the passage of time? How do you consider the gravity and the weight of power? These are exercises in measuring the immeasurable. This is what we do as Raqs in our studio, in the artistic work. That helps us. So it's not as if I'm bringing politics into my artwork. I'm saying that the artistic works sharpens my, let's say, my mathematical ability to think politically. I don't know if that answers your question, because I think that if you, as you said, leveraging institutional power to make a radical statement would also mean the neutralization of that statement at somewhere, right? If you want to make some sharp activist political work in a large museum, then it means that your sharp activist political statement is not that sharp activist political statement. It's something that can be reified within a museum context. So I would rather that people leave the museum and enter the street with greater sharpness and acuity than that they leave the street and enter the museum and think that they've done their politics. I think of it the other way around. I don't know if that answers your question.
May I respond in a very quick
Yeah.
way? Of course, it depends on the political context in this or that country. And
Yeah.
if speaking about Iran or Russia, in my case, when it was like 5 or 6 years ago, there was no possibility to do it on the streets or publicly. So museums were our shelters. That was like the last stand where some statements in a metaphorical way could be perceived for the selected groups of participants who were gathering, like, I don't know, early Christians in catacombs or whatever. So there's also the thing that tends to, it helps to build the communities of those who are not ready to think in a line which is proposed by the mainstream.
Yeah. I don't think that what we are doing is very different. The early Christians in the catacombs identified each other with the sign of the fish, not the cross, because that was a kind of coded sign. I think that in societies where there's high levels of repression and censorship, we take to patterns and we take to symbols that are not immediately readable by power, but by ourselves. And that kind of work, when it happens in museums, is beautiful. I mean, there was once a survey show of ours in the National Gallery of Modern Art in Delhi, which is the state's big museum. We had a work on a law that exists in India called the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. It suspends the right to life. It means that wherever the law operates, the armed forces can shoot to kill. There's no right to life, right? And we made a work about a suspended machine gun, whose nozzle had been turned into the handle of an umbrella, and called it something like the amnesiac foretaste of the forgetting of a powers solution in the world, which used the letters AFSPA to describe a state weapon turned in on itself, right? Now, I used to pay very clear attention and close attention to the visitors' books because they are, I think, the best things to read. And there was one particular visitor who would sign and say, what a wonderful exhibition, what a wonderful exhibition. He came many times. The last time he came, he said, these people have tricked me and fooled me. They have made a blistering attack on the patriotic necessity of our armed forces to fight insurgents. And how is it that the government has allowed this work to happen in a museum? Now, this for me was very interesting. This same person had come 3 times before and hadn't got it, but finally he did. Luckily, our exhibition ended before his statements could do much damage. Now, I think that would be very different right now in India. Right now, a university professor was arrested and now released on bail because of a so-called patriotic statement he made during this fictional war, in which he sort of said the normal stupid patriotic things that people say, but then also questioned himself and questioned the optics of the war. Now, a Supreme Court judge has put a 3-person committee to read and try and understand his statements, and those 3 people are police officers. So we're now in a situation where the Supreme Court of the country, the guarantor of the rights of the citizens, puts 3-person police officer committees to try and understand, not police, but understand the statements made by intellectuals and artists so that if they are found wanting, they will be arrested. That's a very different situation now from where we were in 2014 under the same regime. So people tell me that I should be careful about what I write and be a little careless about what we make. I find that I have greater control over words. I know how to trick algorithms, but a work is more transparent. A work of art can sometimes be more transparent. I have no intention of spending time in an Indian prison, but I wish to be able to speak the truth. So this is a way in which we all find methods of speaking what needs to be said in different contexts, sometimes on the street, sometimes in an article or an essay that we write, sometimes in a work of art. But the work of art is the foundational condition, the mathematical laboratory.
Thank you, Shuddha. Matthew's comment is, hasn't the definition of patience or intizar lost its meaning and turned into a form of fetishism? This applies to both people and the regime.
It's a game. Who is more patient, you or the regime? Especially regimes that begin to be aware that their time is running out, then patience is your weapon if you're a citizen.
And also make the artists the ones that are supposed to create hope. You know,
Yes.
make the intizar into sabr.
Sabr. Make the intizar into sabr, yes.
Yeah.
What if you're dealing with an amorph regime that could just contain itself to any container? This is what we're dealing with, I think.
Yeah, but not only you. I think we're dealing with this in many countries in the world, where there's not one container, where even the opponents sometimes speak in the language of the regime. This also happens. I find that right now in India, it's as if the opposition speaks more in the language of the regime than the regime does sometimes. So where does that leave us? I think where it leaves us, if you ask me, is to practice in our own internal constitutions and in our communities. Perhaps not in public spaces. The time for public will come. It has come and it will come again. But in the interim, we can still communicate meanings, we can still build new vocabularies of practice between ourselves. And I think that even this exercise, what Irfan and his friends have organized, is, I would say, a part of that process. We are learning from each other's sabr, because each has a different color. Our regimes have different colors, but we learn something from, I learn every day from what happens in Iran.
And it makes the relation between artists and the outside reality even more crucial,
Exactly.
Art is
And
not
in the,
simply a medium for self-explanation or, talking about your own feelings. It's about a relentless contemplation about the outside reality.
yes, and curiosities. I mean, I think that let's look at it this way. You in Iran, we in India, and I'm sure there are other people around in this conversation as well who face difficult choices. We are having this conversation because we desire it. And right now, the space of thinking about art gives us this freedom. This may change, but right now it's there. And as long as it is there, we can still have the conversation. I can still show you sculptures of empty robes and say that this is a sign of power losing its substance, its body, right? And we can still think about what that means as a metaphor. I can still tell you about being on a bicycle as a teenager and watching my would-be dictator fall from the sky and experiencing a relief in retrospect. We're in the hands of a terrible man who is ruining our country. But if that guy who fell from the sky that day in 1980, Sanjay Gandhi, had lived, this reality would have been there for the last 40 years. Right now, it's only there for the last 10 years.
Thanks, Shuddha. Any other questions? Comments? I love how
What was the question in the chat that had to be referred to?
No, I mean that was the
Okay.
that one. Yeah. I love how the diversity of our audience. Like everyone comes from
Yeah.
different parts of the world, and we can create this collective thinking. Just everyone chiming in from their point of view. Yeah. It's always great talking to you, Shuddha.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you, and thank everyone that joined tonight. I'll see you tomorrow night at Hito Steiles seminar. Thanks, man.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Someday we will do this face to face.
I'm working on that.
Inshallah.
I'm working on that.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you,
Hopefully see you
Thank you
one day.
so
Yeah,
much.
absolutely. Yeah. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you for
Bye.
having.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Absolutely. Bye.